welcome to ScreenHour with me, Kieran.
And me, Mikey.
Where we will discuss the latest releases of films, series and games regarding our own impressions and experiences. We will also warn you before we deep dive into any spoilers. In this episode, we'll be discussing the recent series by HBO, The Last of Us. So The Last of Us is originally a game created by Naughty Dog, or really created by Neil Druckmann. He's like the brainchild behind The Last of Us. They've decided to create a TV show on it, and they brought in Craig Mazin, who's the showrunner for Chernobyl. My impression of Craig Mazin is he's very much focused on the scientific elements of things. You know, he really dives into the science of it. You definitely get a feel of that. I feel like that's the biggest difference between The Last of Us game and The Last of Us TV show. There's a lot more science and sort of understanding in it to make it seem more of like a tangible, real eventuality with the fungi, and they're like, you know, it's through the yeast, or supposedly through the yeast and through bread and that. And we'll dive more into specifics in a bit. But I think right off the cuff for me, I think literally before we even get this episode going, this TV series is quite possibly one of the best TV series ever.
Ever is a very bold claim, but it is great. HBO don't really set a foot wrong, really. Like, in my experience, there's a reason why, like, you know, they are the premium brand, like, and this is no exception. It is great. It really is. What it's done really well is just be such a good adaptation to the point where it's friendly for all audiences. It's not, don't get me wrong, it's brutal and like stuff like that, but sometimes video game adaptations don't suit people, or because the people might think they're immature, which this definitely isn't, or, you know, or it's too balls deep in lore, or they've got too much to cover. Yeah, because it's like, you know, the trouble with adapting video game stuff is, you know, probably the Last of Us Part 1 is probably about 15-hour game, just short of 20 hours probably, or less than that. And this is not like less than 9-hour TV show, and it really smashes every big, broad point, and even adds extra points.
Yeah.
What I would say is every addition or change, and there isn't much change, it's more so additions, is a positive one. What this will say in those, Kieran, like Charlie touched on just is, when it came out, I obviously heard of it, and like I wanted to watch it, just haven't still, like many other things, haven't got around to watching it, is Chernobyl. I've heard it was good, but this has made me really want to see, because like Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have really like smashed this, as well as obviously now I'm very self-aware that there's a lot more people who go into making a TV show than those two people, as well as all the cast and the crew. But yeah,
I think that was important as well, is that they worked with Neil, because Neil was the brainchild of The Last of Us, you know, and they worked with him and his vision. And I think that was one of the biggest problems with The Witcher, is, you know, more things have come out since, basically that the showrunner, when she was writing the scripts and that, she basically took bits from the books and from the games. She didn't actually draw in. She didn't sort of take like a story and adapt it. She just sort of created her own story from little bits of things that she read, and that was like one of the main flaws of The Witcher. And that's kind of, you know, that's why Henry Cavill left, because it didn't adhere to the source material. Whereas The Last of Us, it is so heavily reliant on the source material, and because Neil's there working with them, it's brilliant. And again, bringing Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson.
Yeah, Ashley Johnson, isn't it?
Bringing them back, it was an absolutely great move, because they absolutely smashed their roles.
Yeah, especially Ashley Johnson's role. But Troy, as always, is great. But Ashley Johnson's role is, again, like, you know, quite specific, so we go to but it's quite lovely. It's quite like, not symbolic, but yeah, it's quite very fitting, should we say.
Yeah. It's what you wanted. It was like, I feel complete. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what we'll do is we'll draw sort of some conclusions from the game and from the series, but I don't think we should discuss part 2, because that has no resemblance to this series.
As you say, it's not mega relevant, but I think it's worth discussing because where they're going to go with it and like making it into a TV show, because they've already discussed, the showrunners have already discussed how they're going to deal with it.
Yeah, so it recently came out that part 2, so the game, which is part 2, that's going to run over several seasons. I don't know if it's going to be 2 seasons or 3 seasons or what. Basically, part 1 was 1 season, right? But part 2 is going to be maybe 2 seasons.
Yeah, and it's not just that. There's a lot of, there's a lot more story involved in part 2. There's a lot more.
There's more characters, isn't there?
There's more characters and they cover a lot more. I've literally literally just completed part 2 while watching the show the last couple of weeks now. But now, to get back to brass tacks, really, the best thing about it is that you can watch it. You can watch it with somebody who hasn't played any of the games, and it's so friendly. Friendly. It's not sunshine and rainbows, but you don't have to have played the game at all because obviously that's why it's a good adaptation. And everybody who has watched the game finds it. A lot I've spoke to finds it. I don't know if rewarding's the right way, but it's a fitting adaptation, and you're just enjoying it.
Yeah, it's what you wanted.
Yeah, and it just feels fair, and as Kieran says, it's what you wanted. There's a few things which really make this show good, but the casting is up there. Is how perfect Pedro Pascal is as Joel and Bella Ramsey is as Ellie, and all the other casting. Whether it be Nick Hoffman or whether it be Murray or whether it'll be Ashley Johnson, like you say, all the people who play the baddies type thing. Like Kieran said, it does a really good job of being semi-realistic. It doesn't feel too far-fetched, the way the science is built at the moment. Especially the first 5 minutes of the entire show really sets the tone really well.
Yeah. So with the bit with John Hannah right at the beginning of the whole season, the whole series, it's set in the 60s, and he's explaining fungi and the realization of, if climate change were to come about and temperatures were to rise, then fungi could live within a host or a human and create this functionality of a cordyceps. And he's sort of describing that in the 60s, and then we jump forward to 2003, is it?
2003, that's it.
And then, that's when the sort of pandemic first outbreaks. And then jumping forward, I think it's the beginning of the 2nd episode, we meet a woman in, she's a doctor in
Indonesia, in Jakarta in Indonesia.
Basically, she's brought in to check out what the situation is because she's the leading expert in fungi, and she sort of has to go in and check it all out, and then she's brought to the sort of the general, as it were, and he's basically asking, what should we do? And she looks at all the reports and everything, and she just realizes what's happening, and all she says is, "Bomb. Just let me go home, spend my final moments with my family, but all you can do is bomb." And it just really sets in the realization of the situation. She's the leading expert, and she's like, we're fucked. That's not something that's in the game. And again, it's another new addition. It's a new scientific sort of thing that I think Craig brings his expertise in, his vision, and that's how he sees things scientifically. And he brought that sort of, that added element. And that's another brilliant added element, as well as the John Hannah element that was added in.
So the premise is we're leading on to so if you haven't watched the show, and we greatly encourage you to do so, is that it's not quite as it's a lot more subtle than The Walking Dead, but it's a zombie apocalypse about less so the zombies or the fungi which creates the zombies,
Cordyceps,
and it's the more so to do with the people and the relationships which happens and the world itself when apocalypse happens, and the main relationship between a young girl and a man who's charged to take it across the country and how that relationship/friendship develops or lack of. And not quite like a buddy cop movie, but as you can imagine, going across the American country during apocalypse doesn't go quite as fun or as easy as planned. So there's a few bumps on the road, per se.
Yeah, I think a good point you should say there is if you're not someone that's comfortable with horror, this is not horror. There's an element there of suspense and sort of trauma or something, but if you're like, oh, I don't like zombie movies or whatever like that, this isn't that. This is more about Joel and Ellie. There's only a few moments where you sort of see the cordyceps, which are, the technical term for these zombies. If you're worried about gore and stuff like that, more worried of seeing gore with human on human than you are with cordyceps on human. If that makes sense.
It is little scary bits, but it's not constantly constantly a horror film, horror show. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a show with a lot of heart. There's definitely, don't get wrong, there's a lot of messed up bits per se, but it's also a show which will make you cry in certain aspects, and there's also a lot of elements where it's very HBO style in the sense that, put it this way, don't get attached. Well, it will make you attached to characters and then rip them away, which is very good but also very bad because it's very good because it's very bad and makes you upset. But that's why it's good.
Yeah, you did touch on it earlier, like the cast. There is not a single piece of bad acting in this whole series. Everyone absolutely brings their A game, and they take you along for the emotional journey. Bella and Pedro, they were 100% the right people to be cast for these roles because they completely imbue the DNA of their characters. There's a scene in particular for me, episode 8, where Ellie's left on alone and she needs to fend for her life. And that is some absolutely incredible emotional acting.
I kind of agree in the sense that there's no real scene in it when you think bitten off more than they can chew. Like,
no,
every acting element is absolutely gold. Like, it really is good. There's one little element I think could have been, adjusted, shall we say, but that's more plot specific. Before we get into those plot points, I just think anybody who is put off it because it's based on a video game, just don't be. It is a reason, like, for a bit of background context, the Last of Us video game, it's widely known as the best, one of the best narratives. Dare I say, if you're a past listener or you listen every now and again, we done an episode on video game narratives, and we both said we're not going to choose The Last of Us because it's such a prominent one. Everybody talks about it because the reason it's so good, and there's a lot of things to do with that. It's the relationship between the characters, it's the world it's built in, and the performances from Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson and the audio cast. But one of the big points is, we'll get to it again, this is very pop specific, is also the ending of the video game, is how it's very decisive, but it also makes a lot of sense and different things. But again, obviously, as you can imagine, it's the same ending as the show.
In sort of 20 years time or whatever, and our kids will say to us, oh, what was the best game you played when you were a kid? Most of our generation would say The Last of Us.
Yeah, exactly. As story-driven games go, we don't want to reach out too much more from what we've already discussed, but it'll be rather this will be Last of Us or Red Dead 2 or whatever. But most people, if you use a game, and especially obviously if they've got PlayStation because it's exclusive, they will touch on Last of Us Part 1 as being such a good game. And also to the point where not a lot of, quite a few, unless it's Skyrim, a lot of video games get remade twice. So to give you some context, non-PlayStation people, Last of Us came out in 2013 on the PlayStation 3. And then to give you some proper idea, the PlayStation 4 came out in 2014, or the end of 2013. Then it got Last of Us remastered, and then last summer or September time in 2022 was Last of Us Part 1, which was redesigned for the PlayStation 5 to give you some sort of idea, like the legs on, the quality of the game.
Yeah, because originally it was just called The Last of Us, but now technically called The Last of Us Part 1.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great drama. It's a great drama, and it's less, you don't get me wrong, it's set in an apocalypse world, but all I can say is it's a great drama. It's definitely worth watching.
And I think, just before we jump into spoilers, do you think if people have the ability to do so, should they play the game before the series, or do you think they should watch the series and then play the game? You know, if they have the ability to do both and they want to do both,
I'd watch the series and play the game.
you watch the series then play the game.
Yeah, because the story, because it's such a good adaptation, you feel like if you play the game first, despite me saying it's such a good adaptation, despite that you spend loads of time in the game, you spend like 15 hours or whatever, so you see more details in the game, which naturally happens. That's not just like off the TV show, because it's less than like 9 hours. In the TV show, you could watch it in like a long weekend, digest that, and then you could take the game in a bit more. The other thing the TV show does do well is, which is by no means like a really slow drama, don't get me wrong, but the action scenes, when there is action scenes, they are shot well. And they said this before the show came out. I think Craig Mason said it, or Neil Druckmann, is that it focuses more on the aftermath of the action. Because like a lot of video games, as you can imagine, you play as Joel, well, 75% of the time you play as Joel, and you're murdering people, or you're murdering the cordyceps zombies or whatever, and you're defending against them. But there is action in it, and when there is action, it's done well, but it's not as much as you'd think. So if you think, oh, I can't be asked to watch non-stop action or want more action, when it's in it, it's done well. It's not also overkill.
See, I would disagree with you in the sense that I think you should play the game, then watch the series, because that's the process that me and you both did. And it made me appreciate the series more for what it is, because it introduced a lot different elements that weren't in the game. So granted, there's more play time, more, like screen time with the game, but the series is that sort of nice, rewarding bit, as we've mentioned. It's a nice, I don't want to say a send-off, because obviously there's still a couple more seasons to come, but it ties in nicely, and it gives you that extra bit that, you wanted. I mean, in particular, episode 3 is not in the game at all. That's something totally unique to the series. So if you were to watch the series and be fucking emotionally moved by episode 3, and then play the game and realise it's got no substance in the game whatsoever, you'd be like, that makes no sense. And there's a few things like that I think you should play the game before you watch the series, if you playing the game is something you wanted to do. If all you want to do is watch the series, then, well, by all means, watch the series. But if you have the option to do both, I think play the game, then watch the series.
Yeah, I can see that. They both complement each other. It doesn't matter what order you're playing, but...
Oh yeah, I don't think our opinion here has much, basis on which or the other. I just thought it'd be interesting to see what your take on that would be and my take.
Oh yeah, but to disagree with you, that the main crux of the show and the game is the relationship between Ellie and Joel, and I feel like you get more of that just by in passing dialogue and the way it is in 14, 15 hours of the game. But saying that, within those hours, you also get annoying stuff like Ellie can't swim, so you got to carry her around on a pallet when you're swimming.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those things.
Which makes you fall a bit out of love with Ellie on the game. What I will say is, and this is not something about the ending, and it's not like narrative, spoilers or specifics at all, is it's probably one of the better, despite everybody knowing there's going to be a season 2 and there's a second game, it's probably one of the most tidiest season endings of any show I've watched for ages. It's like, for ages, for what it's worth, nobody expected it to be a part 2 game, because it ended in such a neat way. There was no real need, and the show does that really well as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it leaves you with a nice red herring, as they say.
You don't need more for you to draw your own conclusions.
Before we get into the juicy spoilers, we'd like to take a moment to thank you for listening to us. And to help further our aspirations, we would forever appreciate it were you to like, subscribe, and follow us on your preferred platforms. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Anchor, and Instagram with our handle, The ScreenHour. And if you'd like to participate in an episode, leave your thoughts on what you'd like to see us cover next. Now, time for those spoilers. You have been warned. I've just got to say this right now. Episode 3 is like a masterpiece of storytelling. I think there are some brilliant episodes, but for me, it's the one episode that I keep thinking about because it was so well done. And it has nothing, it wasn't in the game, so I think there's that sort of newness that intrigues me as well. But it was so well done, so well told. There was no hidden agenda. It's not like it's trying to push sort of like woke culture on you or anything like that. It was so tastefully done. It was so delicate in its presentation and approach. For me, that one episode is better than most TV series out there, like whole series that run for like 10 seasons or whatever. Just one 40-minute episode or however long it was. It was just brilliant.
Not to jump on the bandwagon too much, but the reason why everybody likes this, I think, is that, as Kieran says, it's the only real big change from the show to the game. But it's like 100% welcomed because the storytelling's so tight, and it's probably I think it's like on for an hour and a bit, maybe, that episode.
It was longer than 40. Yeah, now you say that, actually, yeah, I think it is.
And it's a love story, and it's a cute one, it's a brutal one, and there's so many things. But as Kieran says, it's nice seeing, it's just also, despite you being set in like an apocalypse world, it's just so realistic in a lot of ways, like, which happens to be gay, like, and that's what makes it so good as well. What's good as well is that it flows into the overarching storyline of Joel and Ellie and The Last of Us. But despite that, Ellie's not in present day Joel and Ellie, but in that episode. And it flows into what Tess was trying to push on bigger things about looking after each other and, like, falling in love. This world's now Joel is there to protect the people you love, like say was like Bill. If that's your favourite episode, I think my favourite episode is probably the last one. My favourite episode is probably the last one.
Do you mean the last one, or do you mean episode 8 with David?
No, I mean the last one.
See, because I'd put the episode 8 as my close second, as my favourite episode.
I like episode 8 with David, so I really do.
Because it really shows Ellie on her own, vulnerable.
Bella Ramsey, like, smashes it, as you say, being really vulnerable and stuff like that. Especially, I wondered how she was going to not cope, because like, she actually smashes it. That can't underestimate her. I wondered how she was going to deal with like the bit in the locker cage, like sort of thing, how she smashes and breaks his thumb. I was like, that's probably the bit in the whole series on the game where she's the most vicious. And she's the most, like, I don't know, almost feral-like, which is good. She really sticks up for herself. Because you can see she's scared, but also, like, she's not helpless, which is great.
Yeah, she actually emotionally abuses him because they're emotionally abusing her. Or attempting to emotionally abuse her.
David's trying to emotionally manipulate her.
And she does it back. She's very clever and cunning, Ellie is.
Yeah, and I think what's great about her is that she's mature enough to learn things, and she's smart, and she, like, she's good at having, like, relationships with people, and she's like, she's wise beyond her years in certain ways, but also, like, she loves her pun books, and she's lovable in that way, like her sense of humour and stuff. But David, I remember saying, like, she said about Troy Baker, his interview with Troy, and he says he thought he was going to play David, and he thought, like, it was going to be too on the nose, he was saying. So they got him to play James, which I think was quite fitting. Like, it was quite cool, and also there was something funny about, not funny, but something a bit odd about him being killed by Ellie.
Yeah, I felt that when he was killed. There was like something in the pit in me was like, oh, but that's the original Joel.
Yeah.
I've got to ask you as well, Mike. I don't remember this in the game. There might have been like very subtly or what, but I don't remember David trying to rape Ellie.
No, he doesn't. It doesn't get alluded to in the game, I don't think. To be fair, it's not like... It's quite graphic in the way he portrays it, or the way he acts.
Or the way it's suggested.
The way very evident it's suggested. But for what it's worth, like, if you're still listening to this and you haven't watched it, it's a bit mad, like, listen to spoilers, but it's not too graphic, because like Kieran says, it is only suggested. It's not like you see him do it, which, you know, it's brutal enough in a way.
It's like he's leading up to it, but Ellie manages to basically fucking kill him before it happens. And she's so brutal. She just fucking keeps going and going. And that, for me, you know, that performance from Bella there was incredible. Like, I really felt the pain.
It's really great. It is like, it's emotional, it's intense, it's very raw. But I think it's very tasteful that you don't physically see her cave his head in. You just see her acting it out, which is enough, because like you say, because look, she really carries that emotion. It's really intense. So that's great. I think Craig and I think they both said this themselves, and you hear every showrunner say this, and it's like, oh, it's all killer, no filler, alluding to there's no filler episodes, and there really isn't. The closest thing to a filler episode,
Episode 4.
Which one's that? What are you saying, Bill and Frank's episode?
No, that's episode 3. So filler episode is episode 4, when they first go to the city, and then they come across Kathleen. But this is before they meet Henry and Sam, because they meet Henry and Sam in episode 5. So episode 4.
I was going to say episode 3 is the closest thing to the filler, or episode 7. But both of those episodes...
Well, yes, yeah, I see where you're coming at it, because I'm seeing it as a filler episode. For me, you know, I'm seeing it as, if I was going to choose the worst episode, it would be episode 4. That's to choose, you know, the worst of a brilliant bunch, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is there is, if I was to put, you know, it's very different if we don't really do this. We just usually say, like, go watch it now, or go buy it now and play it now, but no episode which dropped below like 8 out of 10 for me. It's all pretty solid, and this is what I'm trying to say, is, and there is no like filler episode. Yeah, the Left Behind episode, the DLC episode is like, the reason I say Left Behind is that's what it's called. The DLC, and it's basically set of just Ellie and Riley, and tells the story how Ellie's immune, well, how Ellie got bit, not how Ellie is immune, sorry, and her friend Riley, how they go adventuring in the mall. That's again another it's a really great tight episode. Has the old, you know, trap of, and like I say, non-spoilers of it. Does a really good job of introducing a great character, making you fall in love with his character in the hour you've got. You know, shows them their flaws, why they're likable, the relationship to the other main character, and then boom, they're dead. Again, it does it with Bill and Frank. Solid hour of you loving them, you seeing their why they're like quite a human. You like it, or why you like it, boom, they're dead. Does it with Tess, but I suppose technically Tess is in 2 episodes.
Does it with Sarah?
Does it with Sarah, yeah. That's what I was going to say, is that the game itself does it really well, but I think the show probably does it better, is that it hinges a lot on the first, like, very first episode, in the first, like, hour or so again, on the first game, is Joel's, like, distraught of how when Sarah gets shot, and their relationship. What it does quite well is the game doesn't have this. You don't have Sarah's perspective, and Sarah looking after Joel in the breakfast time and the start of Joel's birthday in the game is pretty much just, it's like literally like 5 minutes or so. less than that. And then all of a sudden the cordyceps breaks out and happens. Where in the very first episode, you get probably about half hour, really, I'd say, of Joel and Sarah time, which is good because it shows, obviously, they'll say, a father loves their daughter, but you see that bond.
Yeah, I think for gaming purposes, if you were to just control Sarah walking around the house, going to the neighbours, helping the old lady out and then going to school and stuff, from a gaming point of view, that's fucking boring, right? But from a TV point of view, it's like, because especially if you've known, you know what the series is about, you know what the game was. For you, it's a ticking time bomb because you're just waiting for that moment. But they've decided to build up the story of Sarah to make you sort of fall in love with her a bit more than you were able to in the game.
For what it's worth, Kieran's right all the way, in the sense that it would be hard to make the Sarah bits, fun playable parts, but the game, doesn't have to worry about that in that sense. The little negatives I'd have is, a good marketing for it is that it's not too much of a scary horror thing. But one of my favourite elements of both games really is that there's a lot of stealth sections and it's suspenseful, whether you're hiding from the clickers and you're taking them out one by one in dark scary bits, or whether you're just escaping, you're just killing them just in time, or you're running away from the bloaters, the really big scary zombie outbreak, the huge ones. There's a lot of tense moments in the game, and you create them by whether it's not oh, you're a shit player and you fucked it, so you got no ammo or whatever. There's moments in the game where it is tense, you've got to survive. So there could be more bits like that if you ask me. More scenes. So there's only one real scene with the clickers which come to mind in the first episode. Or is it the second? No, I think it's the second episode.
Yeah, it'll be the second with Tess.
Yeah, that's the second episode with Tess. There's only one bit with the bloater, which is really, but again, that zombie outbreak section's really good. Another criticism I'd say, this is probably more to do with the whole show could have done with 10 hours. Really an extra hour, sorry. Not an extra 10 hours, but yeah. Is it in the game, like I say, it seems to, the relationship between John and Ellie seems to build up more gradual, and then it seems to be more of a whole towards the end, where I feel in the show in particular, it's just when they get to Tommy's, that's when they've bonded. Where in the game, there's only real bits before that. There's not basically a lot of it is Joel is really shut off until then. Where in the game, he gradually lets more of himself out a bit more. And in the show, I think he goes doesn't go from 0 to 100, but he could have been slipping a bit more. I don't know.
No, I don't think it was quite, up to 100 when they get to see Tommy. I think it was more so after they left Tommy.
That's my point. That's what I think it could have been before we saw Tommy, because in the game there's bits in it, whether it'll be when you're with, is it Henry and Sam? I think it's Henry and Sam. Yeah. Those bits are a bit more, you're bonding with Ellie a bit more type of thing. There's a bit more fun, light-hearted Joel around then, so that's nice. But again, this is stuff where I'm just nitpicking, and also this has the disadvantage of having something to compare it to, which is the game. Like I say, it's a different media format. Something I praise it for a lot is how tight the last episode is, in the sense that...
Yeah, go on. So why is it your favourite then, yeah?
Just before they get attacked by the Fireflies, which obviously we knew was coming, the scene where he essentially just says to Ellie, the subtext of, I love you now, you're my new daughter. And that's essentially it. But they both don't want to talk about it, but they talk about it without really talking about it. And that sounds really silly, but the subtext they do, and the amount of, when they're that good at acting, they don't and the script is that good, they don't have to actually say their lines, I love you, because their emotions pouring out enough anyway, whether it be the body language or whether it's just like their emotions are doing all the talking. And that's how they both really smash it, especially Pedro, how he's talking about Sarah and how he thought, you know, he's got something to fight for now type of thing. And it's basically him talking about how he tried to kill himself. He was just saying, you know, he tried to kill himself the day after Outback Day because Sarah had died. And he says, but now he's got something to live for now.
I think the character arc as well for Joel is more evident in the show than it is in the game, because it's very subtle. But if you noticed in that final episode, Joel was very concerned for Ellie. He kept giving her the side eye of like checking up on her because she was so quiet, and he kept looking at her like, he never said, are you all right? But you could see in his eyes, he was like, you know, Ellie's not herself. Is she okay? Is she all right? You know? Whereas in the first few episodes, Joel was always steaming ahead, and he never really looked behind to see if Ellie was okay or whatever. You know, and if she was a little, you know, behind or something, he'd sort of drag her, you know, to hurry up. But then in that final episode, you could see he was very concerned for her.
Yeah, and that's more like tiny little nitpicking thing is that it's very evident in literally the last episode or so, but like he doesn't really let himself out until then, which I know again is like both a really good thing and like a tiny little bad thing. Something to my knowledge, which is a tiny little change, and I actually said it out loud when I was watching it with my partner, is that in the game, he doesn't try to kill himself in the game, as far as I know.
No, not that I remember, no.
Don't quote me on that, but I'm like 80% sure that him trying to kill himself is like something added for the show, which does make a lot of sense. It's not far-fetched. It's a nice little, saying nice, you know, suicide's not nice, but like it's a very fitting addition. It makes a lot of sense. And it also draws more emotion to him what he's saying to Ellie, and like how that's a big deal.
It has more gravity, more gravitas to it.
Exactly, more gravitas. Something like which is just an ending, something to point out for the ending of the game and like the show both share in common is that the ending's always been one of those things where, in my view, is it's wrong what Joel's done, but you can just see why he's done it.
Yeah, like if I was in his shoes with that whole journey that had just gone on with me and, you know, a girl called Ellie, that I was basically like her father, and that whole situation, like, yeah, I would totally have done the same thing.
And also on top of that is that, you know, the way obviously it's a story, it's written like this, is that on top of him like getting close to Ellie, is that what makes him more fitting to be close to Ellie is that, you know, he had a daughter himself, he lost that daughter, and obviously that's me very pointing out the obvious, but it only reinforces the fact that he would get closer to a surrogate daughter, where if he didn't have that, he wouldn't have that hole to be filled. The last episode, what I really like is how, for lack of a better word, Joel disagreeing with Marley and, being like, what do you mean you've got to kill her? That's like the boss fight, because there's no real boss in the game, but like the hardest level is you killing all the Fireflies to get to Ellie. And I thought to myself, considering how well they've done the action and the lack of action, my concern was running up to it, how was they going to do it? And what they do it really well is just have like, a montage of him doing it into like, very classical but emotional music in the background. And him just looking absolutely vicious and like a man on the mission. So for like a bit of background, I'll be listening, shout out to the Filthy Casual Boys. I've listened to, these are all my ideas, but then I've listened to the Filthy Casual podcast on it, and Mr. Sunday Movies and Nick Wace, he brought up a funny point. He says they had a call, like got a text going, and he would win in a fight because Pedro Pascal's the biggest man on TV at the moment. Well, between Mandalorian and Joel, both played by Pedro, and James brings up a good point, is that Joel hasn't got like space lasers or space like aid weapons, but Joel would kill the Mandalorian Jin. because he's just mental. Like, if Ellie's life's on the line, he don't care. He would just find you. Even if he had like all 3 of his limbs chopped off, he would like find a way. And that's what's good about Joel, is that he's not perfect.
What I liked, to be fair, about that final, I mean, there's a lot I like, but to pick a few. What I liked about that final episode is that when he's going through the floors of the hospital on his killing spree, I feel like there was a callback to the game, like sort of game mechanics rather, of every time he's, used up a weapon, he picks another one off the floor and carries on moving. And in the game, that's literally what you do, because you don't get much ammo. So you just pick whatever weapon you could find lying around. So I quite like that little callback.
Kieran's right and wrong about that, in the sense that like ammo's really scarce. So what you end up doing is like picking up ammo from other weapons, other like people. So you just end up switching to whatever gun. So you're using your assault rifle, and then your assault rifle runs out of ammo. You're like, oh shit. So you got to use the pistol. And then you find some more assault rifle, then you switch back to your assault rifle, and you're just going like through it like claw and nail. Like.
The other bit is, I never really realised how brutal Joel was until the TV show, because when you're playing the game, you're playing as Joel. So Joel is only as brutal as I portray him to be, and because, I've played, I don't want to say a million different video games, because I don't think it's quite that high, but I've played a lot of different video games, and, at the end of the day, it's kill the bad guys and survive. That's literally most video games, is kill the bad guys. So everything's got that same sort of kill aspect. Whereas in this, because I'm not controlling it, I can see his sort of character arc a little bit better, because I'm disassociated. So I'm seeing why he's becoming as brutal as he is, as such. And those moments, especially when he's trying to find, in episode 8, when he's trying to find where Ellie is, and he's torturing those 2 guys, and he stabs a knife into his knee and threatens to pull off his kneecap. I literally verbally said out loud, holy shit, this is good.
You not find that in the game, though? Do you know that's a cutscene in the game?
Yeah, I do. But it was the noise of the sound effects of when he's trying to pull off the kneecap, right? And you hear it popping, right? I was like, holy shit, this is good, right? And then he gets in, to point at a place on the map, and you got to make sure it's the same place your buddy over there is going to point to. And then he points to a place on the map, and then he kills him, right? And the other guy's like, oh my God, what did you do that for? Right, I'm not going to tell you shit. And he goes, I don't care. I believe him. And then just fucking kills him straight away. I was like, holy shit. Like, obviously it's from the game as well, but because I go from watching the cinematics to going back to playing as him, I know there's like that sort of disconnect, I guess. Whereas watching it in a linear order in the CV show, when you're sort of just invested in the character and it's not like, oh, now I've got to control him sort of thing. It was just, I could sort of be that dissociated continuously through it. It was just, I just got a different viewpoint basically. And I just never truly realised how brutal he is. And then come to that final episode when he goes around the building, taking out all the fireflies. And he goes into the surgery room and just point blank shoots the doctor in the head, and then tells them to unstrap her. Like, he's literally one of the most brutal. He's almost on the same level as God of War, brutal.
Yeah, it's just something the show and the game don't really do, but it's good in a way, because there's no flashback of Joel when he's being a real badass dick Joel. In those times after the outbreak, when they're talking about, those things him and Tommy done to survive, Joel says to Tommy, like, we done those things to survive, and Tommy's like, no, we murdered people. Like, the thing you see Joel do, you can imagine what he'd do to look after his younger brother. It's not too far-fetched if he's doing those things to look after.
You got to do what you got to do in order to survive.
Do what you got to do. For what it's worth, what they do really well is make it so brutal to the point that in the game when you're about to kill the surgeons, because you have to kill the surgeons, surgeon doesn't pose much of a threat in the game. Like, he's got a tiny little scalpel, but it's in front of Ellie, so you have to kill him. Where in this, he, as Kieran says, he just doesn't give two fucks. The guy, before he even is about to pick up the scalpel, and he just goes for him, and then Joel just does it straight away. Where in the game you could take your time, but it shows the brassness of Joel killing him. And then if you remember, it shows his head then, just the bullet hole in his head.
Yeah, for motivation in the part 2, basically, the surgeon's death is quite a pinnacle moment in part 2. I think the way that Ashley Johnson's character, Ashley Johnson, the actress who plays the original Ellie, is introduced into this series is really well done. You could, on some level, you could sort of feel it's a bit of a cop-out. You could kind of roll your eyes at it. But when you think about it, it's really fitting because basically she is Ellie's mother. And in a way, she is Ellie's mother because she created Ellie, the character Ellie. She brought the voice to Ellie, the mannerisms, the mocap.
She is, like you say, she's the one who brought the original Ellie to prominence. She is Ellie. But like you say, there's due to, Ellie's 14 to 15-year-old girl. There's no way now you can make the argument of Ashley Johnson should play Ellie in the show. That just makes no sense.
Yeah.
So it's both her and Troy have fitting cameos in the sense that they're not, what you originally thought, when you see the footage of the trailer footage, Troy Baker was just going to be a background extra or whatever like that. I thought that would have been a bit crap, but both him and Ashley Johnson have quite meaningful cameos, really.
Yeah. And I think what was weird for me as well is the beginning of the final episode is you've got Ashley Johnson running through the woods. You can hear panting and breathing. And immediately I was like, oh, it's Ellie running through the woods. And then you sort of she turns her face backwards, sort of towards the camera. And I'm like, oh, Ellie's a bit older. And I was like, wait, no, that's not Ellie. And then I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh, it's Ashley Johnson. And then I started to fixate on her speaking and her breathing and stuff. And I was like, holy shit, this is literally Ellie from the game. I can hear her. You know what I mean? It was really weird. But then so it turns out she's pregnant and then she runs into this farmhouse. And I'm not being funny, but this farmhouse feels very reminiscent to the farmhouse at the end of part 2. Don't you think?
That's what they were saying in other things I listened to and watch. But I think it's just more of a nod. Obviously it can't be the same one, but like you said, it's very reminiscent.
And then Marlene comes along and basically he's like, oh, I've got to, look after the baby now and I need to shoot Ellie's mum in the head. And it's this is not information we ever knew in the game. Again, this is something else that's completely new, that we get to meet Ellie's mum. We get to meet how Ellie, was born and how Marlene's connected to Ellie and how Ellie ended up where she ended up, a bit more backstory on Ellie. But it's also very, very interesting to figure out of why and how Ellie might be immune.
Yeah, so as Kieran says, it's not something which is in the game. Apparently, it's the comic Neil Druckmann wrote for The Last of Us, Ashley Johnson's character and his mum, Anna. That's a comic which was written a couple of years after the game, I think, or maybe just after. Well, like Kieran says, what's really cool and the science part of it, or science fiction part, is that in the game you never really gets explained why Ellie's immune. What it reminded me of in a way is, if you watch, it isn't quite a different niche reference, but is in the original Blade film, that's how Blade's immune, in the sense that his mom gets turned into a vampire, and Blade, or as she was giving birth, the night she gives birth to Blade, she's turned into a vampire, and then that night, Blade's getting born, so he's the daywalker, half human, half vampire. And a very similar thing obviously happens with Ellie. And you could obsess over the science of it or whatever, but it's then later on in the book end of the episode, Marlene explains why, because the cordyceps already think she's infected, because you're meant to presume the bloodstream of why she's giving birth 2, like the cordyceps already infected her, so that's why they won't infect her even more. So that's why that's how I read it anyway.
Yeah, because that's the important thing with the cordyceps. Why they're not zombies is zombies are just things that just run around meaninglessly and just try and like eat and whatever. Whereas the cordyceps are an ecosystem. They're trying to basically, they're like, it's a fungi, it's a tree, it's trying to spread its roots as far and as deep as it can. And that was very evident in Tess's death, how it sort of like, it sensed that she didn't want to fight. So that's why it sort of slowly pushed itself up against her, because she was, she was prepared to take it. Whereas most of the times when you try to fight it, that's when it tries to attack. And that's why the cordyceps haven't attacked Ellie, because they feel it's one of them. So it feels like it doesn't need, the ecosystem's already in her. So it doesn't need to pass on to her, because it needs to pass on to other places.
Exactly, in the sense that it's just the details, the devils and the details in this.
Yeah.
It's whether it be the way it explains the cordyceps and the way they react. That scene with Tess, when it's a bit of a it's a bit of a rapey kiss. It tries to give her, and it's opening its mouth, and it's John. You see the fungus and the cordyceps, the little almost tentacles or tendrils per se, come out in to try and get Tess. But also that episode does a good way of not too much exposition, but in the way that they says it's like a nervous system as well, where you're killing parts of the ecosystem, and it can sense that you're there. You're stepping on bits of fungus, and then it'll more come that you're that way because it's noticed you've killed some. That gets mentioned in that episode. It's incredibly tight storytelling, and I said that a few times, but it's just, there's no real bit where you think, there's no bit where it's boring, everything's purposeful, there's a lot of bits which are very emotional. The whole Riley and Ellie episode just explores a new dynamic of Ellie's a way to make friendships and relationships, which isn't just with Joel as a father figure. Shows her more of a three-dimensional character. Joel's relationship with Tess, that's great. His relationship, even just silly bits where Tommy sees Joel again, that's lovely. There's loads of little pieces of great casting, like Gabriel, who plays Tommy's great. I think it just shows a lot of potential for season 2, and also we're in safe hands for season 2. Whether that be the writing or the show running, or whether that just be show how much more and how much you want, not the character arcs crap in this season whatsoever, but how much more you want to see Ellie grow as a character, and you want to see that relationship of Joel and Ellie and such.
Yeah, and then for those who don't know, how Ellie will react when she finds out that Joel lied to her.
Yeah, exactly. The semi-ambiguous ending of Ellie just going, all right, okay, if you swear.
What I will say as well is, now that they've got the success of this, I would like to see an Uncharted series. For those who aren't in the know, Uncharted was also created by Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog, and that's sort of the bare bones. I'll say it's like Indiana Jones or Lara Croft. It's like tomb raiding and treasure hunting and stuff like that. And there was a film that came out with Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't crap, given how well they did with the TV series and the game of The Last of Us. All right, if they get the right cast, the right writers involved, I think they could make another brilliant show for Uncharted.
Uncharted is a lot more of an action-adventure game than The Last of Us is. So how you'd have to be...
It'd be stunt-heavy for sure.
It'd have to be a stunt and action TV show. That's our thoughts on that. We'll have a really quick update on things we are playing / watching. I've just got Apple TV due to getting a 6-month free trial. By the way, if you've got a PlayStation 5 or you're with EA, depending on what phone contract you got, just use and abuse that, because you can get 6 months free of Apple TV. And the reason I say this is because I've only finished season 1 of Ted Lasso, and it is great. And I'm behind the trend. I'm behind on the trend, because season 3 is just coming out now. It's so fun and refreshing, and for what it's worth, I hate football. I find football incredibly boring. and I've never been into it, despite being English or whatever. But it's not really about football whatsoever.
No, I kept telling you this.
More about clashing of American and British society, and I don't know, Ted's undeniable optimism, and just, I know it's very feel good, but it has emotional bits, but it's just also very quick and witty and funny. I'm really enjoying that. So what have you been playing or watching? What would you quickly suggest?
I started watching this TV show called The Last Ship. My parents have been recommending it to me for ages, and I finally decided to watch it. You know, it's something that's like, I will watch it. It was just when. But I started watching it now, and it's on Amazon Prime. And the Last Ship, it came out in 2014, I think it did. It was like the first season, and I think there's 5 seasons. I'm about halfway through the 3rd season now, and it's basically about COVID before COVID existed. So there's a flu outbreak that occurs, and it basically wipes out sort of something like 75% of the population of the world, right? It completely kills everyone, and there's these American Navy ship, a destroyer, is sent on a secret mission that they don't know about, and they're trying to find the cure for a disease that they weren't aware about at the time. Only the doctor on board knows about it, and it's about them trying to create the vaccine or the cure for this disease. And when they go back to America, they realize that like the president, vice president, that everyone is dead, right? So it's completely lawless, and there's like just people like, once you get the disease, you've got like 2 days to live, and then you're dead. And then there's like local militias and warlords and stuff trying to control their areas and all of that. And it's all of this sort of information, and basically it's the last ship because they are the last ship floating on the oceans in an essence. And then, yeah, and it's how they have to deal with situations. It's interesting in the sense that you get to learn a lot about naval jargon, about the different things and operations and things that happen. It's what I find interesting, because I like to dive into the specifics of things. It's very interesting because what they do and what happens in the story that the creators have written up is not dissimilar to what actually happened during COVID. And this is 6 years prior.
When was this written then? When was it?
2014.
2014. What's it on?
It's on Amazon Prime.
It's on Amazon Prime. So because it's on Amazon Prime, it's all really good already. Shit. How much of it is set on the actual ship as opposed to the aftermath?
Well, the first season is like completely on the ship. There's like 1 or 2 times they have to like go and get fuel, so they go to like Guatemala, and they have to like dock and get some fuel and supplies, and then they're back on the ship, because on the ship, like, they don't have the cure or anything yet, but they're all away from those who are diseased or who have got the flu, basically. And then in the 2nd season, they spend a bit of time on land, but then there's a big problem, and then they have to go back out to sea. And then in the 3rd season, like, the cure is sort of making its rounds, the vaccine's making its rounds, but there's a conflict in China at the moment, because China's trying to basically take over the world. Doesn't sound dissimilar, does it? And their cures in Japan aren't working, but it's because China released a toxic gas that stops the cure from working. So China can try and claim Japan once everyone's dead.
That's not very nice, is it?
No. This is just, I mean, I'm only halfway through the season, but that's where I'm got to at the moment. But it's all very interesting, because it's like, holy shit, like, this is literally what the fucking world is like now. China's supplying arms to Russia. I can see why my parents suggested it to me. It's an interesting show, and I am enjoying it.
Thank you as always for listening, and take it easy.
Take care.
Toodle bit.
Bye.